All right. Good morning, Carla. Today we're here to talk about the benefits and barriers of technology adoption. I think that's an interesting topic for today.
I think so too. As occupational therapists, we've really have evolved, and there was an article by Roger Smith talking about technology and occupation, the past, present, and the next 100 years of theory and practice. He wrote this out in 2017, and he talks about how we've just always had technology, but there's different types of technology. So it goes on to say that our founding mother of occupational therapy, Slagle, had talked about how occupational therapy has a core foundation in technology. Whether we realize it or not, we just use these components every day, and we may not even think about it. And as a matter of fact, one of my pediatric books is called Pediatric Skills for Occupational Therapy Assistants. Authors Solomon and O'Brien had talked about the various types of technology in chapter 27 on page 573. And what's amazing is that there's different types. So we've got assistive technology, and what it does is it improves functions like functioning, like communication aids, rehabilitation or educational technology, and it's used for educational programs such as software programs. We get the medical technology, and it's used to sustain life, like a respirator. We have low technology that's easy to obtain and use, like a reacher or sock aid. And then we have the high technology, which is a little bit difficult to obtain and use, like electric feeding machine. But we also have assistive appliances like orthotics and assistive tools like switch adaptive toys. So we've really evolved, and our foundation, I believe, is going to grow. It's going to grow. It's going to evolve, especially with AI and virtual reality. So what do you think, Tara?
Um, I think you brought up a lot of great points and a lot of different types of technology and technology adoptions. As predicted, years and like decades ago, technology was always going to be a pivotal part of this profession.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a massive benefits as you listed, um, like orthotic devices, uh, anything that's more technologically savvy in terms of prosthetics. I know we have robotic like prosthetics. Power wheelchairs are a perfect example of a technology based adaptation that has significantly improved the lives of some of our patients. But I wanted to take it over into the educational aspect because as we are in ourselves in a hybrid, in a solely online course, we firsthand get to see a lot of technology and interact with a lot of technology on a daily basis. And I found an article by Andrea Duncan, Mira Premnizir, and Gopika Sitham Paranthanan, excuse me for butchering that, published 2 years ago in April of 2022. And she wrote about the idea of massive open online courses and having that available to healthcare students and how it's a flexible way to deliver content on a virtual platform. So her and her colleagues did a study on this and seeing how newly graduated therapists reflected back on their understanding and their engagement with online courses. And it was interesting because as a lot of people said that online courses were flexible and made things slightly easier, but they felt a need for having more synchronous content or in-person lectures. So I feel that as much as technology does, there's still a little bit of a lack there. So I found another article from Jennifer Gonzalez, and this was in 2018, and she wrote an article on quality checking your technology. And some of the highlights from that were signing in as a student to your own course to make sure you're hitting as much as you can on that online platform because it's evident that students still feel that they're missing something despite technology kind of feeling like a fix-all, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
She suggested running a pilot study of your content, which I find interesting because I wonder how that would work. I guess you can use students from past students, and maybe if they're willing to do it for free, to do a pilot study with you on your presentation or your syllabus.
Interesting.
But I thought that was an interesting suggestion. And then she said to ask yourself truly if your content is achieving the purpose of what it's supposed to do truly. And I think that's a good question because you can kind of get lost in a lot of things online and it might not translate the way that you want it to, which is why it's important to kind of view it from the student lens. What do you think about that?
That's very interesting. There's so much out there as education wise, and we're going into that digital age of AI, and I feel it's good. For example, we had to submit our presentations through Bongo, and AI
Right.
is like determine whether we hit those points, like was it clear, Was the content good? Can we really trust technology like that? I mean, can we really trust AI understands really everything that a human can present? You talk about education. Let's talk about clinical. So there was an article by Siegel and Doyle in 2024 November. It's called Technology Trends in Practice, a survey of occupational therapy practitioners. And they had basically did a cross-sectional quantitative descriptive survey of 26 questions. And it had to do with occupational therapists that work in the clinic and the barriers in that environment. And basically the results said that most of the professionals were frustrated with technology. Like 79% of it found it was easy to learn the new technology, but more than half of them said they can only support their clients with technology if it was like a simple device. And 94% said that some technologies were helpful, whereas 84% said they would utilize it more often in the clinic if they had all the required skills, knowledge, and resources. So I think that's a problem in the clinical domain. So it basically suggested that we really need to go forward and fill in those gaps in technology, because I don't think there's a lot of training for OTs in the high-end tech area. It's very limited. So I think that's one of the biggest barriers besides funding, having the time to learn the new technology or digital service. And it could be very frustrating, very, very frustrating.
That's actually a really interesting point, because I dealt with that firsthand. And I'm sure you've dealt with that as well. But I do have a couple of, I had a coworker and I had a supervisor from my field work long ago. And they had trouble even maneuvering around the laptop, and it would take them forever to do their notes. And I wonder if we had an IT person really sit down with each professional from, and it's difficult the older you are, that some of them are in their late 50s, 60s, and even their 70s, actually still working and practicing full time to this day, because my supervisor was 70. And I think if we had better technology classes or like check-ins with our teachers and other professionals, OT, speech, etc., that we could get that kind of situated. And really it's moving towards this, and we're not moving away from it. Even in school, if you want to be a professor and say that you want to end up being a professor later in life, but you don't have that technology standpoint, you're not going to really do well with your students. I mean, think about SimiCase. ACO approved SimiCase like a long time ago, over a decade ago. And if you don't know how to work that, you as a student and then you as a professor might have trouble grading that or looking at the work that the student is doing and understanding what their thought process was when you're interacting with this virtual person. So I just thought that was very interesting. And there's a study by Elizabeth DeLuise et al. From 2021 about level 1 fieldwork in a simulated environment. And they talk about SimiCase and how SimiCase is widely used in healthcare, not just occupational therapy, and that it can have a lot of benefits, but it has to be aligned in certain ways. And I think you can only really do that if you have a grasp on technology. So they mentioned that there needs to be like a clear objective of what you want the students to get from the SimiCase. There needs to be a syllabus of what videos you're supposed to be interacting with, what the response should be. And then you as a professor should be able to know what kind of response is appropriate, what is getting there, what's hot and cold, because again, clinical reasoning is not going to be a perfect like A plus B equals C answer sometimes. Then you have to go over the assessment you want them to do or what you want to do in the class with them to prove that proficiency with SimiCase. And you need to have a really clear rubric. That's what they were mentioning if you want to build professional and clinical skills. But I just thought it was interesting to tie it back to that, because so much of also in practice is you can use a lot of videos and interactive stuff online, which I use in my practice. But I find that my older colleagues or the ones that are less tech savvy are not going to go on YouTube and use those videos to do warm-up activities, visual perceptual activities, copying the movements and having body awareness through like dance breaks and stuff like that online. And there was another study in 2014. There was a study on blog task-based teaching and how you can use that in tandem with YouTube. So this article was by Varya Virdania et al. From 2024. So very recent. And the findings showed that the experimental group using the blog task-based teaching and in tandem with YouTube, they were producing and editing and engaging in so much on YouTube that it enhanced their learning deeply, as opposed to the group that didn't have this passive learning, like had a passive learning or traditional approach. And it was language-based. It was based on learning language, improving language learning results. But I thought that was interesting.
That's pretty interesting too. I was teaching at the OTA program, and honestly, I had some problems with the technology barrier as a professor. I had to do a paper and pen test instead of the proctoring online. I didn't know how to do that. So I want to make things easier. I did the pen and paper, and they liked it. So sometimes going back to basics is better, you know. But yeah, we as professors, even teaching, we have to know technology. You know,
Right.
it's evolving. But another thing is when I was in my clinical field, I would have older population that would have iPhones. And I feel like iPhones are a lot harder to use than smartphones. And so I would end up saying, hey, what about a doodle phone? And it's very simple. But you'll have a family that's like, well, we have an iPhone. Mom and dad should be able to use that. You need to teach them how to use that. And most of the time, it's not that simple. And you're right, Tara, we have to evolve, whether we like it or not. So that being said, I'm a Gen Xer, so we were just on the cusp of really knowing technology back in the day. MS-DOS, we had to program things. And I think that as we get older, our population, as they age, will know more about the technology. But I digress. Going back to the clinical field, I was working for Accent Care, and they had like these Q codes, and they expected the patients to use their phone, to use a Q code, to screenshot this Q code and do their exercises like that or check in. And it failed. It
Oh,
failed.
of course it failed.
Very, very, really, really bad. So basically, Tara, what do you think that moving forward in technology we should address with these barriers?
So I think moving forward, we need to address the pros, like the clear benefits of platforms like Case, because it's so valuable because you're getting that mock patient
Right.
scenario and communication. So those are great, and I would love to see those continued to be used in practice. And I love when we had like adaptive or assistive technology classes, or like once in a month kind of lectures, or where people bring in their company's prosthetics and technological instruments and stuff like that, innovations in general. I think it's awesome to have courses like that, but it's not going to feel as tied together to your courses if your professor is a little bit behind, maybe especially with the technology part of the laptop, the computers, navigating the screen, being able to screen share appropriately, not being muted and talking at the same time. I ran into a couple of professors who were doing that.
Right.
And I think that bridging that gap is really the key. I think also with what you just mentioned, I feel like clinicians need to be more aware need to actually use better conditional and interactive reasoning, because had they used that reasoning, they would know that there's no way their patient who's 70 years old and has eye problems is going to be able to navigate on their iPhone to the home exercise plan they're supposed to do and click the video and have it play and the sound be on,
Right.
Those are all things that the clinician needs to be aware of.
Yeah, I agree with that. The thing is like, I think if the clinician is not privy or has lack of knowledge in the technology field, how do they expect their patient or their student to engage? So again, it's that lack of knowledge. And you know what? Another thing is standardized assessments. How can we have these validation tools to measure a client's digital functioning? How can we measure that if they're really understanding or really doing the technology? Time and funding constraints. I think you can relate to me on this as a student. Time. When do we have time to learn all these programs? And the money, Zoom cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have this misconception about technology. We think that technology is not suitable for our clients, maybe because we don't feel it's suitable for us. We don't want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But again, and maybe our organization. I had a lady who had. She was an occupational therapist, and she was coming on board, and she didn't know how to navigate the HCBC. It's our documentation system.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in Panera, and she just broke down crying because I was supposed to do a skills check off with her. And yet she was getting out of the OT field into the field of technology. So that was kind of like,
Concerning.
Yes. Even, she's going to tech field, and here she can't navigate this power system that we have, the HCBC. I think a really good area for education, because we have all these education hubs like occupationaltherapy.com or Medline Education. I think if someone could put together just a occupational therapy or physical therapy in collaboration with OT, tech college, your continuing education in technology. And I think that would be a great foundation, a great hub for everyone to go to say, hey, I got to learn this SimLab. I got to learn this right here.
So Carla, I want to ask you, where do you think OT is going to be 5 years from now in regards to technology and more AI related innovations?
That's a good question, Tara. I think that we have no choice but to adapt to high-end technology. I think everyone can pretty much teach the low technology like, reachers and sockets, but we really need to start adapting to change. And I think that as clinicians, we're always telling our patients also when they have bad health habits, we need to adapt, and overcome. Right. So I think that we have no choice but to do this. But the new generation that's coming up is pretty savvy in technology, but I think this technology is going to be more intense. Mm-hmm.
I find that even myself, like I'm 26, I grew up, I got my first phone when I was 10, middle school, got the iPods and the iTouch and the iPhones. So like I've always been around technology, but I still struggle with certain aspects of it, or I don't feel like sometimes it can be overwhelming or just difficult, especially like, for example, if I'm recording a Zoom and I want to share my screen, sometimes it's difficult to navigate when it's still sharing versus what slide I'm on. And I've had issues with that, and you would think I wouldn't because of like me being, I'm pretty sure I'm like Gen X, but even us, like even people my age and younger have to learn the specifics of technology. It makes it easier when you grow up with it, but there still needs to be courses or like some sort of certificate that I think everyone in healthcare needs to have and pass.
Right.
Say that they are like proficient in a certain level of technology for like best practice, because it's really not best practice if you're taking a whole hour and a half to 2 hours to document when you're sitting there at the computer trying to like, get the thing to work. Maybe the Wi-Fi is slow. And it's like, well, what kind of computer do you have? Do you need to like plug into a different network? Are you clicking on the right thing? Are you over clicking and causing your computer to slow down? Stuff like that. I feel like we need to have, like you said, a hub or a course on that kind of like nips that in the bud so that we don't have these issues moving forward.
Tara, that's true. Like if we as clinicians are avoiding technology, are we not doing a disservice to our clients that can use technology to benefit them? That's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any other thoughts on like a platform for teaching this, or like making sure that we don't have those as many negatives as there has been?
I think we need to come together as an OT community and just have a hub for technology. I think that would be great. A Facebook, an Instagram, an X account. That would be great for all of us, how to learn these platforms so we all can learn. Yeah. All right. Well, Tara, I think we had a great podcast, and I'm looking forward to the next semester and learning a little bit more technology.
Yes, me as well. I think we're going to get more involved with this as we get into our capstone soon, and maybe we'll find a way to incorporate that into our topic or our literature reviews, and just keep pushing the conversation forward on technology. And I have positive hopes for the next 5 years of OT and technology and AI.
Me too. Thanks, Tara.
No problem.